I remember I woke up the morning we were going to leave and I was like, I'm not going back. Like I literally woke up and looked at it. I was like, I'm not going back. And he's like, well, we have to go back. And I think it was burnout, but what had burnout was just the whole lifestyle.
Support for this show comes from Exit Factor. Exit Factor offers a proven method that helps small to mid-sized business owners maximize their company's value. Through one-to-one consulting services and online programs, the trusted advisors at Exit Factor teach entrepreneurs how to successfully navigate and fully leverage strategies when buying, building, and selling their companies. Participants that follow the program have experienced considerable results, with some increasing business value as much as 57% in 1 year. It's time to start running your business every day like you are going to sell it. Learn more at exitfactor.com/pod. Now enjoy How I Sold.
Welcome to How I Sold, presented by Exit Factor. Only 13% of all businesses in the U.S. are sold, but we only hear about the billion-dollar stories. Here we explore the real-life stories of entrepreneurs and business owners like you that were able to build, grow, and sell their small businesses. Now, here is your business exit expert, #1 best-selling author, and host, Jessica Fialkovich.
Welcome to How I Sold. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, and I created this podcast after spending over a decade in mergers, acquisitions, and exits, and understanding that we often hear the stories of the unicorn sales. You know, those companies valued over $1 billion. But we often don't hear the real life stories, the stories of the thousands of entrepreneurs that sell their businesses every year. These are their stories. So today, we're going to switch up the roles. Many of you have asked about my story and the first business I founded and sold, Decanted. It was a wine boutique and collector's market based in Naples, Florida. And since I obviously can't interview myself, I'd like to welcome my sister, Jaclyn Poole.
Well, hello, everyone. As Jessica mentioned, I'm Jaclyn, and I am her little sister. And I am also an entrepreneur, the owner and founder of Mod Assistants. I'm here to help tell her story of founding and building one of Naples' most talked about wine boutiques from scratch when she knew nothing about wine, Florida, or retail. Usually at this point in the podcast, you are asking another entrepreneur all about their story, and we never get to hear about yours. So today we are focusing on yours, the very first business that you built up with your husband and how you sold it. So to get started, tell us about that business. What was your first business?
Yeah, so our first business, it was a wine boutique store called Decanted. We founded it in Naples, Florida, southwest coast of Florida. And it was a combination of like a retail wine store. We had a mini like wine tasting bar, but then, and can get into this later, we got into this whole crazy collector's market where we were selling wine online to collectors all through North America, even into like Hong Kong.
Yes, I remember the list of people and watching you and Al, your husband, go after all of these unique wines. That was a very exciting part of the business.
Yeah. Super fun.
Back to the beginning though, how did this come up? Because you were living in Colorado and then all of a sudden you called us and you said, hey, we're moving to Florida and we're going to open a wine shop. So how did that even start?
We were working for this company out of Colorado that I don't usually name because it didn't go well. Not because of anything they did, but we moved out there in 2008, right? So we're doing real estate development in Aspen in 2008. Part of our project was funded by Lehman Brothers. Everybody kind of knows how the story ends, but in September of 2008, a lot of the funding dried up on the project we were working on. And Al was working in the finance department and I was working in the sales department. And I remember I came home and I said, hey, we've got a problem. We had a really bad day in sales. And he's like, why? Did you guys like not sell anything? I was like, not only did we not sell anything, we just did refunds all day of deposits. And he's like, well, that's actually troubling because, we're not getting any more funding either. So we kind of both saw the writing on the wall. And as much as we loved Colorado, living in Aspen full-time is very difficult. It's really expensive. It's very remote. And we knew we couldn't stay there without the secure job we had before. So we vetted all kinds of things. I know mom and dad wanted us to come back to New Jersey. That was not an option. We looked at going to California. California was more expensive than Colorado. And my future in-laws at the time had this place in Naples they weren't using. And they said, hey, well, you can go stay in Naples. You could, start a business there if you want. You could use the house. We have an extra car there. We have a boat. And I was like, all right, that sounds great. So that was really like how we ended up in Florida. And then we backed into what we were going to do next, but we picked Florida first before we picked what we were going to do.
And then the wine part just came about because you both enjoy wine.
Yeah. So we had these friends in Aspen. They were part owners in a store called Grape and Grain. And for people who are familiar with Aspen, Grape and Grain is kind of like a locals legend. They were part of the founders of the Aspen Food and Wine Festival, cutest little boutique. And we, as the job situation got worse, we became more and more frequent customers of Grape and Grain. So, and I love because they knew who we were. It felt like they remembered everything, but on the back end of their system, they had like all of our preferences of what types of wines we like, and they knew what to recommend. And even like, I remember, I think it was mom, or maybe it was Al's mom needed a Christmas present for us one year, and they called Grape and Grain. And they're like, oh, just now we'll put a case together for them. We know exactly like what they drink. And so we just thought it was just like such a cool business concept, and they did such a great job at it. And also they seemed to have like a great life, right? They sat around, tasted wine all day, went skiing in the mornings and seemed to make a decent living because they were living in Aspen. So we're like, well, what if we just do that, but we do it in Naples? So one of the owners, JC, we told him, we're like, hey, do you mind if we just like rip off your concept and do it in Florida? He's like, no, go for it. So that became the basis of the model of Decanted was, Grape and Grain, and the types of wines they offer, the type of environment. Like we designed even our shelves like theirs. They used to, I don't know if they still do, write prices in white chalk pencil on the wines. So then when you wipe it off, you don't have any residue from like the stickers that you would have like a total wine. We did that too. So we took a lot of inspiration from Grape and Grain, but that's where the wine came in. Was just, we had a great customer experience there. We wanted to create it for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I will come back to you talking about their wonderful lifestyle, because I think I remember you all working very long hours in the first year and not necessarily having that balance of a lifestyle, but that's a business for you. Okay. So you moved to Florida. You have this house to stay in already. You found a great location for the business. I remember it. It was on a pretty busy road in Naples. And Al and his dad were building out everything inside the store. I remember that whole process. So what is the day-to-day like? What was your first year like in the business?
Yeah. So the first year was interesting. The first year, actually the first 6 months was all set up. Right. So, and I think we, as entrepreneurs, we forget this part of it. We just, in a startup, we just think about, all right, the day the business starts going, but there's all this lead up to getting the business up and running. And especially when you're looking at a brick and mortar, there's so much more lead up time. So we actually officially started the business before we moved to Florida, looking for those locations. And that took about, I'd say almost 6 months. We connected through to a realtor while we were still living in Colorado, at Paige, who's now a really good friend of ours. And we looked at tons of different spaces. I think we had 3 different leases fall through. And the location on Goodlet Avenue was kind of like our backup. And it's interesting because like it's like one of those things where like everything happens for a reason. And we really wanted to be in this other shopping center, and something happened with the lease and the tenant improvement and allowance. The landlord wouldn't do it. And Paige was like, maybe this is just not meant to be. Let's go back to that Goodlet space that we had looked at like 10 times. So we ended up going under contract there. We had a great landlord, great location, great neighbors, but the space needed a lot of work. It was a former women's boutique. So we had to convert it to a different use. So like the whole first 6 months, literally during the day, I'd say from like, we get up at like 7, 8 o'clock until probably about mid-afternoon would be spent building out the actual business model. figure out, what type of inventory we're going to buy. We would have wine vendors come by the house and do tasting for like hours upon hours during the morning. So like starting at 8-9 o'clock in the morning, we'd be tasting wine to try and fill our inventory and place the orders ahead of time of what we need in the store. And then at like right after lunch, we'd go to the store and we'd build out, and we had to paint everything, build all of the shelves from scratch. We built this really cool wine bar made out of boxes and everything from scratch. We did have to work with contractors to put in plumbing and all that stuff. So that was the first 6 months of the first year. Like before we had $1 of revenue, we were just shelling out all this money, and we're building out the website and inventory platforms and all that stuff before opening day. And then we opened early December of 2009. And like from then on there, like it was just like full on. We were in the store. Like you said, there was no work-life balance. Like we had no employees. It was just Al, myself, and our dog Sailor to start. And then Al's parents did come down for a couple months in the beginning and help us in the store. And we worked retail hours. So I think when we first opened, we opened 7 days a week, and I think we were open 10 to 10, 7 days a week, which was like a total mistake. But we just felt like, all right, we'll be open as often as we can so we can bring all these people in and they can know that we're here. But we were working all of those hours ourselves, and then we would switch off where who would be in the front servicing customers, doing inventory, and then who would be in the back working on the website, the marketing, inventory, tasting, stuff like that. So even if we had like a break, it wasn't really a break. It would be like we're in the back meeting with vendors and placing orders and things like that. So the whole first year, I don't even know how many hours we worked, but like there was there was nothing else in my life besides Decanted for that entire first year. And Sailor. We'd take breaks to walk Sailor, but that was about it.
Well, he was there. He was the store dog.
He did. He was. We got him. What did we get him in July of June of 2009. So we got him like right after we moved to Naples, right before we signed the lease, and we set up his like little bed in the back. And it was so funny because I always used to say like you could tell who was a dog person because Sailor would like smell the dog people from the front, and he would come out of his like little crate in the back and he'd run up and greet them. And if they weren't dog people, he like never came out. But yeah, he worked just as many hours as we did.
Yes. Through all of your businesses after that, Sailor was always there.
Always there. Number one greeter.
I love it. So how far in were you when you hired your first employee, when you got to that point where it was just way too much for you all to take on yourself?
Yeah, I think it was, it was the beginning of the second year. So it was in 2010, probably like spring, and in Florida, like the busy seasons from November to May about. And I think around March, we hit a period where we're like, we just need help. So we just started by hiring part-time people to work in the store and make sure that the storefront was being taken care of, like checkout basically. And then Al and I handled the higher end clients, the higher end wine, and all the stuff on the back end of the business. So and the first couple employees were not great. We were trying to be cheap and pay under the table and really low hourly rates. And, I think we got like a few college students and things like that. And we're selling like boutique wine that they know nothing about. Their idea of wine is like Mad Dog 2020 at the time. So, which is not bad, but that's just their stage of life. Right. So we went through those first couple employees pretty fast. And I'd say maybe by mid 2010, June or July, we were reevaluating totally of like who we were going to hire to help us run the store.
Yeah. And running a retail business, that's a whole different type of business than any other. Like you mentioned, you have hours that you have to be there, that you have to be open. And if you're working with a higher end clientele, your employees have to know what they're talking about. So that's difficult. Yeah.
It really was difficult, but we also had to like realize that, you kind of get what you pay for, right? Yeah. So with us not willing to, I don't know what our hourly rate was back then, but like $10-12 an hour, whatever minimum wage was, with us not willing to pay, like maybe it cost us $15 an hour to get somebody really good. that was something we had to overcome. And really when we did, I think that's when we started attracting the type of talent and team that we needed to build the business.
Yeah. Again, with retail, you mentioned earlier that inventory. That is a whole another thing that someone who came from a service business does not have to deal with, which is me. I've always been in a service business. So how did you go about your inventory? Did that ever cause cash flow issues? What was that like having to deal with that in a retail store?
Yeah, inventory is a bear, right? So a lot of our profit went to inventory, right? When we're trying to prove ourselves to a new market and to a more luxury client base, like there's just like a bare minimum level of inventory you have to have in the store at any time to make it look full. And that doesn't mean that, especially like in our business, we're not going to turn our inventory constantly. You know, like it's not Target where people are going to come in and like buy everything and then they reload every week. There'll be some things that will hold for weeks or months at a time. So it caused a ton of cash flow issues because, and I think this is where I see some people get tripped up going into retail or some type of product-based business is they think, oh, I'm going to make all this money, but they don't realize that they have to reinvest a lot of their profit back into inventory purchasing. And if you don't manage your cash flow correctly, you can get caught in that game. So that happened to us a couple times before we really learned our lesson. But we did get to a point where we had a really great inventory management system. And as great as technology is still to this day, I know because we still do deals where we still have to go physically count inventory. Like you still have to physically count your inventory and make sure that the POS is tracking it correctly. And, the humans are checking every bottle out correctly and all that stuff. So once we got into a good flow of that, and then managing our buying patterns better, then we were able to do cash flow issues too. The other thing we started right around that time, actually, I just remember this as we were talking, why we started the Collectors Club. So we had this idea, so we got caught in a cash flow crunch. And at this point, so this is mid to late 2010, we had gotten sucked into the really upper end of the market, like really expensive wine. And I say sucked in, but it was like really beneficial for us. A lot of our competitors didn't have cash because of the recession, and they weren't able to get that wine for the high-end customers. In the wine world, they call it allocations. So like some of the most famous wines in the world, some of the most expensive, they're very difficult to get because the producers make so little of them, right? And what they'll do is they'll do these allocations, or basically like an interview process where you have to prove to the winery that you're worthy to sell their wine. And typically you're going to make higher margins on them, but they're also more expensive. So we get sucked into that world, and we've invested a lot of money into this high-end luxury allocated inventory, but we know we're going to be able to sell it and turn around to make some really good margins. But we're caught in a cash flow issue because we can't make people come into the door faster than they're coming into the door. So we were trying to figure out how do we get rid of some of this wine quickly so we can bridge the gap with the cash flow, pay our vendors, pay our credit cards, all that stuff. And we had a list of luxury wine collectors that we had acquired from a defunct wine store in Naples that had gone out of business like a couple years earlier. And so we reached out to them and we said, hey, we're Decanted. We're now in the luxury wine market. And we just had maybe 3 or 4 pictures of the wines on the email that we had. And we said hey, and they were all very hard to get at the time. Here's the wine, here's the rating, here's your retail price. Here's if you buy by the case. And literally the first email, within 15 minutes, we sold out of everything we put on the email. And instantly the cash flow was solved. And we're like, wait a second, this is way better than just operating the retail store, right? And what we also noticed was those collectors, they didn't just buy one bottle, they would buy a whole case at a time. So it's not we'd sell a $200 bottle, but it's way better if we sell, a 6-pack for $1,200, So that was how we started to bridge our cash flow issues. And eventually that part of the business became way bigger and more profitable than the walk-in traffic from the retail store.
Yes. And I remember the relationships that you all built with these high-end customers. I mean, you were Al was the wine guy. That is who they went to find things. And they would spend money with you all without even thinking about it.
It's a crazy world. And I find this in like some other luxury markets. Like it still blows my mind today where like you'll have watch collectors that like, if you can get a certain watch, it doesn't matter what it costs, like they'll pay for it. And you have that same experience with wine collectors, right? And because we got pulled into that market and it was like this circle, right? So if we could get wine and then like get the luxury wine and then we would sell the luxury wine, then we would be able to get more luxury wine and higher end luxury wines. And we just kept getting pulled further and further and further into it until in the state of Florida, we were getting some of the most desired allocations in the state. It was funny. I don't even think I told you this. We were somewhere and we randomly ran into a manager of one of the high-end Disney restaurants. And you know this because you guys go to Disney a lot and you go to some of these restaurants, but Disney has some like really high-end food and wine dining, right? And so we're talking to this guy and Al just mentioned like, oh, hey, we used to be in the wine business in Naples. And he mentioned Decanted. He goes, you guys took our allocation of DRC one year. And that's when it like hit me. And this was like a year or two ago. And I was like, holy crap. Like we were doing so much luxury business that they started giving us Disney's allocations, you know? But it was because we had built this network and we started from that list we acquired and then it traveled word of mouth. Right. And the retail store did help. Like, you know, like some of our closest friends and clients, like, you know, Steven from Toronto and everything, like we met them in the store. Right. So we built on this, but the list kept growing and growing. And every time we would get one of those luxury allocations, like we would just send it out and it would be sold within minutes because there was that desire for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how many years into the business would you say you were when you really hit success with that upper tier of clients?
I mean, honestly, it was a really fast ride. So by the end of 2010, by the end of our 1-year anniversary of opening, we were really hitting our stride with that collector business. And we'd broken $1 million in revenue. We were profitable. Like it was really ticking. Like we're like, all right, this is working, you know?
So you saw a lot of success with people coming into the store, just everyday people. I specifically remember you all having a lot of events to bring new people in. Yeah. And you're seeing a lot of success with this high end, but of course it is a business. It is not all rainbows. So what were some of the challenges that you were seeing?
Yeah. So we're still working retail hours. We still thought it was really important to be in the store a lot. We had hired at that time, probably right before then, this woman named Mariah, who was really integral to our growth and really became more of the front store manager for us. So that helped a little bit. But I mean, it was really just the three of us and then a part-time or two employee here or there. So we're still working all those retail hours. We're doing the events. I forgot about the ultimate wine throwdowns. I should mention that because people in Naples that listen to this, they love those ultimate wine throwdowns.
You had so many events, which I think is what led to the success a little bit. If you're thinking marketing terms, but yeah, you were in the store a lot.
Yeah, we're in the store a lot. So we're doing events, probably 2-3 nights a week between in-store and outside the store. We started doing wine tastings, education classes, joint events with like the Ritz and stuff like that. And then the collectors market started pulling our hours even more, right? So our collectors, they all had some connection to Naples. But Naples is a snowbirds market, right? So people are there during the winter or for the vacation, and they go back to wherever they're from. So they would go back to their homes and we would still do business with them through the collectors' emails and things like that. And, you know, at first it was like, okay, a lot of them were in Ohio and the Midwest. And then we got pulled into like this Canadian market and then the Northeast and the West Coast and Virginia. And then, you know, all of a sudden we get into trading outside of the US and into some collectors markets and things like that in Hong Kong. So now we've got the retail hours, but now we're working across multiple time zones too, right? So now you're not just working like, you know, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're working 8 a.m. Eastern to 8 p.m. Eastern, and then you're going home and you're catching up in email with your West Coast clients for another 3 hours, right? Layer on top of that, 3 nights a week, you're like entertaining drinking, tasting with clients. And it was like an unfathomable amount of hours. Like, I don't think I could pull that off ever again. I mean, thank God I was in my early 20s, without a child. So
yeah. Like you said, that business was your life for the years that you were down there.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And it took a toll. Like there was a lot of things, we didn't do during that 3-year period. Like, like Al and I love to explore and travel. And, we didn't do a lot of that. The only travel we did while we owned Decanted was to go out to California to taste wine. Right. Yeah. That was pretty much the only travel we were doing, or we go to the East Coast and meet importers from Europe. Right. That's what we did. We didn't do any of that. The days that we did have off, like we might have a half a day off, once a week, and we, take the boat out, spend some time with Sailor. But that was it. I mean, we got married in that period too. I don't know really how I planned or pulled off a wedding, but that was actually the only real vacation we took, and Mariah covered the store the whole time we were gone, but our honeymoon was our only vacation we took. So
for business owners that are in retail, how would you make it work long-term and still be successful?
We took too long to let go of like little things. So right before we sold, we were hitting a breaking point, and we brought on more staff. So I don't know if you remember this, but we had, you came in to help with marketing at one point. Then we hired an events coordinator. We hired more people to help in the retail store, and it started to ease. And really, if we had done that probably a year or two in advance, and we could afford it, we just didn't want to do it. If we had done that in advance, I think it really would have helped ease like the mental stuff that was going on and how many hours we were working. And the other thing is that and I do see some business owners and retail store owners still do this too, is like your clients will accept whatever expectations you set with them. But when we started, I said we were to open 10 to 10, 7 days a week. We did eventually reduce those hours, but like we had set our expectations with our clients that we were available whenever, right? And that was totally on us. Like if we had said like, we're only available between 8 to 5 Eastern Standard Time, our clients would have been cool. Like I'll just place my orders then. Right. But because we have set the expectations that like, you can call us whenever and wherever, and we'll fit in your schedule, and kept the store open so many hours, like that's what people came to expect. And I think if we had done that differently up front with both retail and the online stuff, like our whole lives would have been different, Yeah.
And that's two of the best pieces of advice, I think, for small business owners, is to set the right expectations for your clients and also learn to hand things off, which is also two very difficult things to learn. But yes, absolutely. How did the process get started for even the idea of selling the business? Did somebody approach you? Were you just completely burnt out and you started looking? How did that start?
Yeah. So I always tell the story, like we started Decanted with the thought we were going to sell it. Like, we were 24 when we started. Like, I don't think either one of us thought we were going to sell wine for the rest of our lives. We're not people that just sit in one place, right? I mean, like, I don't know how many times we've moved in our lifetimes, but it's a lot. So like there was that thought, like from the very beginning, we were going to sell it, but we never talked about a timeline. We never talked about exit goals or anything. And so it was March of 2012, and we had come back to Aspen to visit Al's cousins and go skiing for our birthdays. And we were just out in Aspen, and we were having fun and skiing, and like really it's like feeling like we had our lives back, like just taking a break. The store was in great hands at that time and everything. And I remember I woke up the morning we were going to leave, and I was like, I'm not going back. Like I literally like woke up and looked at Al, I was like, I'm not going back. So I had just decided overnight to sell our company because of extreme burnout. And when we come back in just a minute, the story of how we exited Decanted and built the foundation of what was to come for Exit Factor. Stay with us. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, featuring Jaclyn Poole as our guest host, and you are listening to How I Sold.
Support for this show comes from Exit Factor. Have you ever wondered if your business is sellable? The truth is, thousands of businesses sell every year, from just a few $1,000s to billions. Now, there are a ton of experts that will teach you how to start a business, more on how to grow one. but only Exit Factor will teach you how to build a valuable and efficient business that is sellable at any time, no matter what happens. Visit exitfactor.com/pod to learn more about us and take our free assessment to find out if your business is sellable. That's exitfactor.com/pod.
Hey, welcome back to How I Sold. I'm Jessica Fialkovich. And today, for many listener requests, I'm telling the story of my first business sale, Decanted. My husband, Al, and I had built a very successful wine retail business, but our success demanded much of our time, much more time than we could even give. Hitting extreme burnout, we decided to sell the business overnight, but we had still so many lessons to learn. We were just out in Aspen and we're having fun and skiing and like really it's like feeling like we had our lives back, like just taking a break. The store was in great hands at that time and everything. And I remember I woke up the morning we were going to leave and I was like, I'm not going back. Like I literally like woke up and looked at it. I was like, I'm not going back. And he's like, well, we have to go back. And I think it was burnout, but what had burnout was just the whole lifestyle, right? So it was the business, but like our whole life had become about wine and alcohol. And like you said, like we were the wine people, right? So even when we weren't working, we got invited to dinner parties and events and like it was drinking and explaining the wine and everything. And I was just like, I don't want to do it anymore, you know? And, so there was no planning. There was no discussion. We got on a plane. We landed the next day. It was like a Monday and like we make all decisions. We made it pretty quickly. We called our lawyer first thing that morning. And we're like, hey, we're going to sell the business. How do we do it? And he's like, that's awesome. I have no idea. He's like, and that's when we went down this whole road of like just trying to find someone who would help us because in everybody's eyes, like we were a small business and it was very owner dependent and no one was going to buy it. So, but yeah, the decision was made literally overnight. No discussion, no thoughts, no planning.
And then did you find yourselves a business broker? I can't even remember how this all went down.
Yeah. So we started with Danny, our attorney, and he helped us like try and find anybody. And Naples is a pretty small business market. Like it's not Miami. It's not Fort Lauderdale. It's a pretty small town. Right. So there's not a whole lot of advisors, in that area. And especially at that time, we're talking like what, 10, 11 years ago now. So we asked around and we talked to a couple of investment bankers and they're like, you're too small. No one will buy you. We can't help. So Danny finally found like one guy that was willing to talk to us. And I remember the meeting and he was like, yeah, sure. I'll take on your business. I don't know if anybody else will buy it, but I'll take it on and we'll see what happens. And we're like, okay. So then like, I felt like I had to prove to him that our business was worth something. So what we did at that point is Al continued running the business and I dove head first into the process. So really like helping him sell the business, and putting together like the package and running due diligence and all that stuff. And so we went out to market and, I think it shocked me, but really it shocked our broker. We had like 3 offers, within the first couple of weeks. So yeah.
Were you profitable at this point?
We were profitable, but we were living a lot through the business like most business owners do. So, we had bad tax advice and things like that, not just from our accountants, but from, friends and families like, oh, make sure you reduce your earnings so you don't pay taxes. And so our books and records were quite messy. I rebuilt all of our books and records, while we were on the market to sell. Once I realized like how big of a mistake it was, like I spent weeks to go back and rebuild our whole QuickBooks for 3 years. So we were profitable, but it was really hard to see and digest. And that took a lot of time and effort. And honestly, like we got really lucky that the buyers we were working with were willing to work with us through that process of rebuilding our financials.
As a business broker now, and I am just guessing by being a part of just helping you with your businesses, but I'm not a business broker. Isn't that with most small businesses? Is that the books are kind of a mess? I mean, isn't that very common?
It's super common. And I think Like as business owners, like if you would have asked me at that time, like, are your books a mess? I'd be like, no, like, I know what my inventory is. I know what, my revenue is. Like, yeah, we make some money. Like I would have never said my books were a mess. Right. But they were not structured in a way that I could sell the business, or even like outside of selling the business. If I wanted to raise capital, like at one point before we sold, we had talked about raising capital or going to get a loan and expanding to the East Coast of Florida. Like we couldn't have done that either, just how our books were situated. So yeah, we run into that a lot, but I see the same thing as where you talk to business owners, they're like, no, my books they're totally clean. Right. But they're not set up in a way where it makes you attractive to a buyer, an investor, or a bank. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So looking back, would you have done things differently? You weren't thinking exit when you started the business, which I think most small business owners are also not necessarily thinking exit. So would you have done things differently, or do you think it was okay and you were able to clean it up by the time you actually sold?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we would have done tweaks. Right. And I think if we had done these tweaks, maybe we could have gotten a better deal. Like, honestly, like, and I'm very forthright with this. We got so lucky. Like we got a great deal. And I don't think if I was representing our business as a broker, 99 times out of 100, I could not get that deal for a client. So like we got super lucky. Right. So I think if we made these tweaks, we probably maybe would have solidified the deal that we had, and it wouldn't have been up to luck. But also like we would have saved ourselves so much stress, heartache, depression after the fact. Like we did get a good financial deal, but Decanted's no longer in business, for a reason. Right. So that's a whole different emotional toll that it took on us. But like, the books and records, definitely, I would have loved to just understand that a bit more. And understand like there is like, if you claim all this profitability, and I'm not an accountant or a lawyer, but if you claim all this profitability, there is other ways you can do tax efficient mechanisms as a business owner where you don't have to pay taxes on every single dollar, right? You can, funnel some stuff away, your 401k, save some money, things like that. So I think that would have been definitely something we would have done differently. We definitely would have structured the business not so much around us from the very beginning with the thoughts. Like, I think one of the hardest parts of the transition was that collector base, right? Because they're so, and to this day, some of them are really close friends of ours. Like I'm very grateful for that group because we have friends all around the world from that collector group, but they were very intertwined with Just Now. And we did have Jamie, who helped with us through the transition. She actually ran Decanted after we sold all the way for the new buyer until they closed. And they started to get comfortable with Jamie over time, but we waited too long to make that introduction and really hand over those key relationships. And the last thing is like, everything was in our heads. Right. So like when due diligence training and transition was just a total mess because everything was like up here with Al and I. So when a buyer would need to know how to do something even really simple, it would be a whole training session versus just being like, here's a one pager on how to update inventory on the website,
So putting processes in place, isn't that something everyone is always talking about? Yep.
Totally. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So you got your deal, or excuse me, you have offers.
Yep.
And you're working through due diligence. How did everything go with closing? Did anything come up? Did you have any issues there?
No. So we were really lucky. Due diligence was a mess. Our broker, after he found the buyer, disappeared. So which like now being in the business that I'm in, it was the best learning experience I could have ever had. Best test case. It was my deal. Like if I was going to make a mistake, I'll learn it all. Right. So the broker introduced us to the buyer and then left basically. And, I ran due diligence, with the buyer's representative. The buyer was going to be hands-off buyer. So she wasn't really involved in the whole process. So the buyer rep and I ran all the due diligence. We had lots of like minor issues that came up through that, but over the course of 30 days, we were able to work through it. Again, we were super lucky. The deal proceeded as the LOI stated. We didn't have what's called like a retrade or a renegotiation. It was a cash deal. We closed on time. Again, like all this stuff. So lucky. And I say that because I don't want people to think like this is how it goes. Because our deal should not have gone the way it did, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I don't remember that process for you being incredibly stressful, but then again, I was on the outside. So
yeah, it was just like, I think it, and I do see our clients struggle with this a lot. What was really weighing on me in that period was how the outside world was going to perceive everything. And this is what I think I struggle with this. And you know this about me because you're my sister and closest friend, right? But I care a lot about what other people think. And it really stresses me out. It makes me anxious. And through that whole process, like we couldn't tell anybody. Like I think you guys knew, and that was about it. You know, no one else knew, and our lawyer. And so, and all these relationships we had built and these friendships and all this stuff. And not only like, were we selling the business, like we were leaving, we were going to move back to Colorado. Right. And we knew the time frame. Like we listed the business for sale at the end of March. We closed May 31st and we were moving July 5th. Right. So we knew May 31st to July 5th, we had to transition the business, tell our employees, tell our customers, tell our friends, our family, like we're leaving. So that was the stress that was weighing on me. It's like, yeah, I'm working through all these due diligence things and I'm working crazy hours still, but like in the back of my mind, I'm like, what is everyone going to think? Right. And are they going to be mad? Are they going to be upset? Are they going to care? And I see our clients struggle with this a lot. And I'll just sum up the spoiler alert was that like, no one cared. Like it was not that they didn't care, like they were happy for us, right? They knew we needed to do what we do. And like, and a lot of our client friends, which a lot of our friends from Decanted are older than us. Like the average age in Naples is 80, right? So a lot of our friends were older than us and you know, they were mid to late life. And they were like, you guys are in your early 20s. We didn't expect you to do this forever, right? So everybody was super happy for us. So I created this whole story in my mind that people were going to be upset, angry, quit, leave, yell at us. And that was like the mental battle I was fighting through this whole thing that was creating all the stress.
Yeah. And did you have bad feedback? I'm sure you had a couple people, or no, nothing at all.
You know what? It's so funny. Like I'm sure we did at the time, but like that saying, like, if it doesn't matter 5 years from now, does it actually really matter? Yeah. You know, we're 11 years out now. I don't remember any of it. So if it did, it probably didn't ever matter. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had some of our competitors, like we didn't have great relationships with our competitors. You know, we came in young with chips on our shoulder and like, I own that, but they also did not like how we came in and we were so young and started dominating the market. So we had a lot of our competitors talking about how we didn't deserve it. And you know, whoever bought the business was stupid and was going to fail and a lot of that stuff, but like, whatever.
Well, yeah, we know where those comments are really coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, something that I think is probably a fear of a lot of business owners, and I don't know if we can get too deep into this, but the business after you left it was not very successful for very long. So what was that like after, you know, watching your baby not be as successful after you left?
I think it was toughest on Big Al, my father-in-law. Like, remember, like for a while he drove by the store like every week and we're like, Big Al, please just stop, you know?
Well, he helped build some of that store. Like I can see that.
Yeah. So, the buyer was a hands-off buyer. She was a snowbird and she came to Naples a couple months a year, but other than that, she lived in the Midwest. So she took the complete opposite approach of completely being hands-off. And so she did empower Jamie, who was our GM at the time. She had taken over from Mariah when Mariah moved to the Bahamas. And it was nice to see Jamie empowered, and she did a really great job with holding it together. But what was hard, and we did stay on as consultants for a year to help Jamie with that transition. It was hard to see the major business model decision changes that the buyer had made. And I get why she made it. As a hands-off owner, it was a lot easier. So one, she reduced inventory levels. She cut it to about half of what we used to hold in the store. So when you would walk in, it would feel empty, right? There wasn't wine on all the shelves and things like that. And then they ran the collector's market for about a year afterwards. And then the buyers saw that one, it was really that relationship based. And there was a risk that if Jamie left, those relationships would go too. And also that there was a higher inventory and cash flow needs on those wines. So she decided to cut the entire program, which I think that was hard for us to watch because that was the relationships, right? That was like everything we had built and like just went up in smoke. It was also like we knew that was the beginning of the end for them because that was where, and this is where I think the buyer made an analytical mistake is if you looked at the numbers, it was a big percentage of our revenue, but not like 80% of the revenue, right? But then if you looked at our profitability, it was like 70 to 80% of the profit, right? Because you make more money on those luxury wines. And because you're turning them so quickly, it also helped cash flow better. We kind of knew that was the beginning of the end. They did actually, they stayed in business probably 6 or 7 years after the sale. So, Jamie did a great job. She kept it afloat that whole time. And then after she left and she pursued a different career, that was kind of when it went downhill. And they ended up closing. Yeah. I think that part wasn't hard for us because we saw the whole downfall. Like it is bittersweet too. Like it would be amazing if we could go back to Naples and visit Big Al and Patty and pop in Decanted. And we did that a couple of times the first couple of years, but it's gone. And I kind of feel like what happened to it, it tarnished the reputation of Decanted. Like the story of Decanted's not what it started as. And in a weird way, I feel like that's a reflection on us too,
Well, yeah. And people looking at it from the outside might not even know that you sold. So yes, it could look as if the business under your guidance was not working, but obviously we know that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. But still, it's sad.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that you were leaving. You were physically moving out of Florida after this business was sold pretty quickly after the business was sold. Where did you go? What are you doing now?
Yeah. So we knew we were going back to Colorado, but we had no plan. So we road tripped for about 6 months. Early in our lives, we'd love to do road trips. So Al Saylor and I packed up and we road tripped all the way up the East Coast throughout Canada, into the Rockies. And the whole time we're like talking, we're like, what are we going to do? And we're like, maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll start another wine store. And in that conversation, we're like, hey, that business brokerage thing was kind of fun. Like it was kind of fun to sell our own business and our broker was terrible. Like, we had this a winery owner that we worked with in California, really super famous, like billionaire type. And I remember we had a meeting with him when we were first getting started. And I had said something and he said, you know what, that's great, Jess. He's like, if you can ever find an industry where if you do something just 1% better than your competition, you kill them, stay in that industry. And so that conversation has held with me for a really long time. And I kept thinking about that on that road trip. And I was like, well, 1% better than our broker. I think we could do 50% better than our broker without lifting a finger. Right. And it wasn't like because he was a bad guy. He just like, he didn't care. He didn't treat us with a lot of respect because in his eyes, we were too small, And so we kept having that conversation. So we landed in Colorado still without a plan. And we hop on Biz Buy Sell to start searching for businesses to buy. And there's this office for Transworld Business Advisors that's up for resale, which was not the business brokerage firm we used to sell our company. It was a different competitor. But they were based out of Florida and they had started franchising a couple years earlier. And someone bought the franchise in Denver and it didn't work out. And now they're selling it. And it was just like one of those, I don't know, just like one of those fortuitous moments where like we had been talking about it. And then, literally the first week we start working in Colorado, it's like the first listing that pulls up on Biz Buy Sell. I sent an inquiry. This guy, Jason, good friend of ours now, but this guy, Jason at the time was repping Transworld and he picks up the phone. He's like, oh yeah, like I'm totally going to be in Denver next week. Do you want to meet? And it was just like all these things that had lined up.
Was he really going to be in Denver?
No, he was going to fly in to meet us.
Oh, it's one of those classic sales tricks. Oh, I'm going to be in your area next week.
Yeah, no, he was a great sales guy, but yeah, he flew into Denver to meet us the next week. Yeah. We took a little bit of time actually to think about that, but we flew down to Florida early 2013, signed paperwork to buy that franchise location. And since then we've built business brokerage firms with Transworld across Colorado, Texas, Las Vegas. And then now obviously have ventured into the exit planning side with Exit Factor too.
Yeah, I think your choices throughout your career have led you to the next step. And I work with a lot of business brokers through you all, and I hear so many of them were business owners and went through that process and then stepped into the business brokerage side. So that's pretty common for the industry.
Yeah, it's very common. I mean, it's helpful whenever you can do something that, I mean, look, it is an emotional process going through your business sale. Like like I've said, we're lucky a lot of times, but like we also we were young, we had some emotional attachment to our business, but not a ton. But it is an emotional process, especially if you're working with clients that they've built a family business over 2, 3, 4 decades, right? And I think being able to say you've stood in your shoes and remember what those days feel like when you're questioning, should you be selling? You're worried that you're not telling your employees or your family about what's going on. Like when you have those relatable experiences, I think it makes you a better broker and also just a better person, right?
And from your experience through Decanted, have you never once told somebody they were too small to work with?
Never. It's so funny. I think if you hear if you hear my interviews like that, I'll get asked questions a lot about what size do you have to be to sell a business? I'm like, you can sell a business at any size, which is completely true. Look, if you're a small company, you're doing $100,000 in sales, you cannot sell your business for $1 million. It's just not possible, right? If you're losing money, you're not going to sell your business for $1 million. It's not possible, but it's worth something. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that has always been my passion and driving factor for Transworld and Exit Factors to communicate that message, because we still to this day see the majority of businesses close their doors because they think they're worthless, right? And at the end of the day, they have something that is of value, whether it's equipment or customer lists or whatever. And it just breaks my heart. If I drive by a restaurant or a store and I see it went out of business, if I'm like, man, you have money on the table. Maybe it was only $20,000 or $50,000, but what does that $20,000 or $50,000 do for you or your kids? Yeah. So no, never once have I told anyone, I don't think, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, that they're too small. Have I adjusted valuation expectations on small businesses? Definitely. But every business is worth something,
And now in your new business with Exit Factor, you're helping small businesses to get ready to sell. So I think that's really important because I mentioned earlier, I've had my own businesses. I have my own business now, and I don't think about exiting. That's not something that's really on my mind at the moment. But there is so many steps that you can take to make your business more attractive to buyers. So that's an amazing thing to have for small business owners, because most of us don't know what to do. We don't know what this should look like.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, really why I love the Exit Factor thing is because it's what I would have loved with Decanted, right? I would have just loved that playbook of this is what makes a business valuable. And then I think what's eye-opening is once you understand what makes a business valuable, it really comes down to, you have to build a profitable and efficient business, right? And then I tell people all the time, it's when you get to that point, you may decide you don't want to sell, right? But if you're running your business, it's going to be attractive for buyers and investors all the time, you're actually putting more profit and time back into your pockets. And you're wait a second, this is way more enjoyable, right? So if I had been running Decanted like we teach people now, back then, maybe we wouldn't have burnt out. I don't know. We probably still would have exited and done something else, but maybe it wouldn't have been, such a quick decision like it was,
Yeah. You were at the end of the line. You just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. And most business owners are it's just what happens. Right. But what we're trying to do is at least give business owners the tools way ahead of time, that if that day does happen, like it happened to me, where you wake up and you're like, I'm not going back, then your business is sellable. Right. Mm-hmm. It's set up in a way that that you can exit, and you can do so gracefully and with some cash in your pocket.
Yeah. Well, and something that most people, I don't think, would do is dive into to being their own business broker like you did. I think most people, if they were working with someone who wasn't helping, they would probably just give up. So this is nice that you put in a lot of the work for us, because most of us don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think I was so focused on, and I tell this to clients too a lot, like I was so focused on what was next. Like I always tell clients, like when you're going through this process, it's hard, it's emotional, it's trying, like focus on like what you're chasing, like not what you're running away from. And so I was chasing my Colorado dream of like going back and hiking and spending time outdoors. And like I was so focused on that, like willing to do whatever it took to get us to that point. And we had to sell the business. We needed that money to get to Colorado.
So looking back on everything that you experienced with Decanted, I guess focusing really on Decanted now, because that is the business that you went through this process for, what would your one piece of advice be for somebody who is in a small business, possibly thinking about an exit?
Yeah. So my biggest piece of advice, I've stolen this from a friend, but I've stolen it so many times that now I think I can claim it, is you don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. Like you don't have to learn all the lessons yourself. And when I ran Decanted, I thought I had to learn everything myself. And we had no really outside help, outside advice. We didn't even like have a group of other business owners we hung out with. Like we just felt like we had to do it all on our own. And looking back, if I had invested in some education, advisors, resources that had taught me the path and taught me the way of properly owning and running a business that could be sellable in the future, I think a lot of those challenges, from the working hours to the burnouts to the hiring, like I wouldn't have had to taken the time to learn those lessons. So that's my biggest piece of advice always, is just, you don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. Other people have made these mistakes before. And I think it's foolish as entrepreneurs if we don't take the opportunity to learn from others.
Mm-hmm. And just have peers around you. It doesn't always have to be that you're paying for advisors. There are people around that could help you.
Exactly. I mean, we're both very involved in Entrepreneurs Organization. And since I've started Transworld, it's been key to helping businesses grow. And that's all peer-led, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, this has been fun to switch up the roles today and learn a little bit about you and your business and your past selling businesses. So thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for interviewing me, sister.
Yes. That was Jessica Fialkovich, founder of Decanted. It is great to hear the background and inspiration of how Exit Factor and How I Sold was started, even in those early days of building and selling Decanted. It's really fun to look back on those times. I was there by her side and along for the ride, but seeing where she is now, the path really all makes sense.
Hey, and thanks so much for listening to the show this week. If you want to support us, spread the word by subscribing on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. You can also leave us a 5-star review and post about us on social media. We really do appreciate it. If you want to learn more about How I Sold or apply to be on the show, go to howisold.co. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, and you've been listening to How I Sold.
Thank you for listening to How I Sold, presented by Exit Factor. Please follow us on your favorite podcasting app so you don't miss an episode. Another way to support the show is by leaving a review. Find more information about How I Sold and Exit Factor, including how to be on the show, at www.exitfactor.com/howisold.